Hello and welcome. This is going to be episode 1 of my new series, Stan's Journey Through the Universe. This is going to be my personal journal of things I've learned and find interesting. Hopefully there'll be a few things that you also find interesting and can gain some value from. So here we are in episode 1 for you select few family and friends who have crumbled to the pressure of me begging you to watch my new YouTube video. I'm Harry Stansfield, but the channel will be called Stanley, which is a name that's gained some traction from my childhood, with many variations throughout the years. But it's just a name I like. So, some of the topics that I'll be covering on this channel, stuff that I find personally interesting, is self-improvement, psychology, technology, world politics, gaming, and movies. And most importantly of all, I'll be blatantly ripping off podcasts I enjoy. So I guess it's the time to talk about my first topic, as I didn't want this to be a pointless intro video. Today I'm going to do a deep dive into psilocybin and its effects on mental health. But first, let me give a disclaimer. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have qualifications in medicine or pharmacology. I've just read up on this because it interests me, and I want to share the good and the bad with you so you can form your own opinions. I'm going to try and be as unbiased as possible. But, very importantly, I'm not recommending you go and take this drug. I'm just trying to give you the facts. It's purely an educational video. So, our first topic, psilocybin, the good and the bad. What is psilocybin? Psilocybin is a naturally occurring psychedelic compound that's found in over 200 species of fungi, otherwise known as mushrooms. So what's a psychedelic? Psychedelics are compounds that cause mind-altering effects to an individual's perception of reality and the things around them. Due to their effects, they have been the topic of much controversy, with some people singing their praises and suggesting them to anyone who will listen, and saying that they're an experience of a lifetime and they need to be done. And then there are others who renounce them, say you shouldn't do them at all, it's dangerous, and they should be made illegal. And they are illegal in many parts of the world. So if you are going to do them, I suggest you do some research on your local laws and behave responsibly. But what are some of the names for psilocybin? Because psilocybin's the name of the compound. You've probably heard one of these few names, like magic mushrooms, shrooms, mushies, psychedelic fungi, tea party, which is specifically for when it's been brewed in tea, Mexican mushrooms, or God or God's flesh, which was named by the Aztec Indians in the early 1500s. Then there are all the specific names for the 200 species of mushrooms that contain psilocybin, some of which have clearly been given by individuals who distribute them. Cough coughs, Jedi mindfuck. So, where can they be found? Psilocybin is in mushrooms, as I've said, but to add a little bit more meat to that bone, those mushrooms grow worldwide, but they thrive in humid environments with fluctuating temperatures from 60 to 80 degrees. Their favourite area to grow being tropical rainforest due to the humidity. But they also grow in moorlands and up in the rainforest. However, these mushrooms take about 1 to 2 months to grow and fully mature. This grow cycle is split up into 4 main stages. So we've got stage 1, which is spore dispersal and germination, which takes 1 to 2 weeks. In nature, mature mushrooms release spores into the air, which are carried by wind, rain, animals, or insects. When these spores land on suitable substrate or land, typically rich decaying organic matter like wood, manure, or forest litter, they begin to germinate. Stage 2, colonization of the substrate, which takes 2 to 3 weeks. Once the spores germinate, they develop mycelium, which spreads out in search of nutrients. Mycelium acts as the body of the fungus, so the roots essentially, growing within the substrate E.G, decaying leaves, soil, and manure, and they're absorbing nutrients while they do this. Which then takes us on to stage 3, which is the fruiting, which takes about 1 to 2 weeks. Once the mycelium has fully colonized the substrate, certain environmental triggers, such as changes in temperature, humidity, and light, cause the mycelium to produce mushrooms. Typically, after heavy rainfall or cooler weather, the mycelium begins to form mushroom pins, which is the body of the mushroom, which grow into fully fruiting bodies. The final stage, which is maturing and spore release, which takes us back to the beginning of the cycle. This takes a few days to weeks. The mushrooms grow to maturity, taking anywhere from a few days to a couple of weeks depending on conditions. As they mature, the caps open and the spores are released from the gills, which are the little slits underneath the cap, as you can see in the top picture. But this depends on conditions. As they mature, they open, the gills release spores into the environment, and the cycle begins again. So, how can it be taken? There are many ways to ingest psilocybin-filled mushrooms. They all have their own pros and cons, and people prefer ones over others. So, let's go over a few of the methods. The first one, and the most simple one, is eating raw, the dried mushrooms. This is the most straightforward way of ingesting psilocybin, where you can eat and chew the mushrooms directly, or you can have them with other food if you prefer. This method takes 20 minutes to 60 minutes to fully take effect, and you start getting some of those effects that they're known for. And those effects can last up to 6 hours. The pro to this method is that it's simple. You don't need any preparation. It's just straight hand to mouth with the mushrooms. You don't need to do anything else. Cons are mushrooms have a very raw and strong, unpleasant taste, according to some people. Some people like them, but I'll leave that up to your judgment. But digestion, can take a long period of time. So that takes us on to the second method, which is drinking it via a brewed mushroom tea, which is that tea party that I told you about earlier. So mushrooms can be steeped in hot water to make a psilocybin tea, which is often mixed with other herbs or flavors to improve the taste. Again, might be something you prefer if you don't like the taste of those raw mushrooms. This method speeds up the effect onset to 15 to 30 minutes, which cuts the previous one in half. So if you really want that fast intake and for it to just kick in, you can go with that one. And it's going to take 15 to 30 minutes to take effect. But it's still going to take that 6 hours duration. So you're going to have the full duration, but a bit of a quicker uptime. So if you're a bit nervous about taking these mushrooms and you just want to get straight to it, this might be the method for you. The pros are it's easier on the stomach. It's got a faster onset of effects and it's easier to consume. Some people definitely prefer this method. It tastes better and it's quicker. And also it's easier to share. The cons are it requires more preparation. And some people have reported that it gets a lower potency when done for too long. So if you're steeping the mushrooms in that hot water for a bit too long, you might lose some potency. Again, you might like that, depending on how strong and long you want it to last. So that brings us on to our third and the final one I'm going to cover method of intaking them, and that's through edibles or capsules. Now, this method is a bit harder to come by because it needs to be specially made. Unless you know how to do it, you're going to have to talk to someone who does know how to do it. You can't just go out and pick these, and it's not a simple method to do this. So, again, we're back to that 30 to 60 minute time to take effect, and you're going to get still that 6 hours of duration. The pros of this is it can taste much better in those edible forms, and it can have no taste at all if you're doing it via capsules. The cons are it's hard to measure precise doses. You can easily put too high of a dose in here, and you can have a really bad experience. So if you are going to do this, I suggest you speak to someone who knows what they're doing, and you do it very carefully. So now you know how to intake them and where to find them. How does your body process them? Now, as soon as you intake these mushrooms, your body's going to get to quick work on metabolizing them. And then once metabolized, psilocybin turns into psilocin, which is the active compound in psilocybin mushrooms, which takes the psychedelic effect, which causes the psychedelic effects commonly reported. Once psilocin is produced by the liver, it easily binds to the blood and travels to your brain, primarily interacting with the brain's serotonin receptors, especially the 5-HT2A receptor, for all you nerds out there that know. This is involved in mood, cognition, and perception. By binding to these receptors, psilocin alters the brain's serotonin signaling, which can lead to changes in thought patterns, emotions, and sensory perceptions. Some studies have even suggested that psilocin promotes neuroplasticity, which is a fancy way of saying it helps your brain form new neural connections, which is why some people report long-lasting benefits after psilocybin trips. Psilocin's interaction with serotonin receptors leads to the commonly reported effects of altered visual and auditory perceptions, heightened emotions, a sense of interconnectedness, and ego dissolution. So, now you know how it's processed. Where did it actually come from? What are some of the early tales and stories of psilocybin? Now, as mentioned earlier, psilocybin was coined as God's flesh by the Aztec Indians in the early 1500s. However, when Spanish missionaries came over in the 1500s, they attempted to destroy all records and evidence of the use of these mushrooms for whatever reason. I'm sure you can imagine a few. They were, however, documented by the 16th century Spanish writer, which later intrigued 20th century ethnopharmacologists, that's a long word, leading to decades of searching for these mushrooms. It was later in 1957 that a photo essay in a popular magazine described for the Western world the use of these mushrooms, which led to the obtaining and studies of these mushrooms and their active component, psilocybin. So, once they were discovered and they started to be studied, they were used for a range of things, such as recreational use, party use, the traditional and famous hipsters on their psilocybin and LSD trips. But the part that we're most excited for, and the part I'm most interested in, is its use in therapy. This has been a rather new discovery and a new set of studies, which was obviously hindered by the fact it was made illegal for a large part of the time in the late 20th century and the early 21st century. But emerging research suggests that psilocybin may lead to lasting changes in brain function, especially related to mood, anxiety, and even personality traits like openness. These effects are still being studied, but they seem to be related to the brain's increased connectivity and plasticity during the psychedelic experience. So that's a new brain pathway formation. Sorry. Okay. So it's due to these experiences they've been studied more in therapy, specifically in the treatment of psychological illnesses such as depression, anxiety, addiction even, and PTSD. And it's even been seen to help depression in late stages of terminal illnesses like cancer, just to give you an idea of how powerful this can be. So, Why is it so effective when treating these illnesses? When you ingest psilocybin, the active product psilocin interacts with the brain's serotonin receptors, as we've previously mentioned. This interaction causes many feelings that can benefit the therapeutic process. The main benefit that helps this area is below. Reduces activity in the default mode network, which is associated with self-referential thought and ego. Self-referential meaning like on oneself, so thoughts that relate to you. This can therefore lead to feeling connected to something greater or more than yourself. You can see how this would help with someone. If they're away from all these thoughts upon themselves and then bringing themselves down with where they are in life, what they're doing, and certain characteristics about themselves, and they can feel connected to a greater thing than them, whether it be their community or whether it be a job or a mission in life that they have. That can really help with those depressive and anxious episodes. So, the second reason, increased emotional processing. Psilocybin can enhance the emotional senses of the brain, which potentially leads to a greater sense of empathy and emotional insight. This can really help with those like previous traumas that bring people down and that give them the effects of PTSD, anxiety, depression. It can help alleviate it by helping them process those deep and powerful emotions a bit more, and maybe even get an insight into how other people were feeling in those situations and why they did certain things that may have affected you so badly. So the third reason is the altered brain pathway communication. Psilocybin increases connectivity between different regions of the brain that don't typically interact. This may then lead to the sensation of an altered reality. So if these different brain areas are communicating, you might get a different sense of how things are. You may see things in a bit of a blue or a gloomy way in your normal everyday life. But if these different areas can speak to each other and you can get a sensation of an altered reality, you might see things a bit differently. It might give you a bit of a better outlook on life. So as you can see, with all of these different effects, it can really help in the therapeutic process, especially when it comes to some of these mental illnesses that have been so high and common in the 21st century. However, like I mentioned earlier, this research is rather new due to the fact that psilocybin and magic mushrooms and other psychedelic products have been illegal in many places. Some places are starting to turn around to them, and many organisations are trying to get it approved by the FDA for medical use. So there might be some great breakthroughs in the future. So, what are some of the common experiences with psilocybin? So, as we've mentioned, psilocybin alters the way your brain works. It alters your perception of reality, visuals, auditory, and even the way you think. So obviously people are going to have a range of different experiences with this. Some not too good, some great. Some people have reported a connection with the spiritual world and God due to some of the reasons we mentioned earlier. Some people have really worked through some past trauma and some issues they have with themselves. Some people have made great friendships, but also there is a lot of negatives that come with it, and it would only be right that I mention some of these as well. So when people have these bad experiences, people tend to refer to them as a bad trip. This can be anything from upbringing of negative feelings and memories to even what people call a hell loop, which is where you're stuck in the same little time slot where you feel like time's repeating itself on loop, ironically named, every 5 to 10 seconds or so. This can be incredibly frustrating and really bring people into a bad negative place. So, as mentioned earlier, you should really be careful with the doses you're going to do, the environments you're going to do them in. And I highly suggest if you are going to do these things, have a trusted friend with you who can help guide you through this thing and make sure you don't go down too much of a negative loop. So, these bad interactions and these bad situations do happen, and they can really affect some people. But it depends the way you look at it. Some people refer to a bad trip as a challenging trip, because some people like to think that every psychedelic experience is trying to teach you something and that you can take something from it. And that might be a good way to look at it. Your brain is working differently. It has better emotional processing, and parts of it are speaking like they wouldn't have spoke before. You're forming new neural pathways. It could be true that you can gain some really good insights and future work through the use of psilocybin, and hence why it's being used so actively in therapy and other forms of medicine. So, as I've just mentioned, some people have also talked about psilocybin in relation to spirituality or God. This is an interesting one, because why would it make you believe or have a sensation of God even more? But if we look back on some of the effects we talked about earlier, we've got the lesser sense of self and ego leading to the feeling of a connection with something higher. Now, most people's brain goes straight to religion when they think of something higher as the higher being, but it could be a higher power, spirituality. We've got the altered perception of surrounding colours and colours being amplified. This could give you a sense of a higher beauty of what reality is, and sometimes that's hard to explain other than it being given by some sort of divine entity. Then there's the higher emotional processing leading to breakthroughs. It could be seen as a gift or a word from God. Now this, again, all of this is just subjective. People experience what they're going to experience, and there has been studies to say that the people saying they've had these experiences or gone towards God in their psychedelic trips, they were already having those kind of leanings and those kind of thoughts beforehand. So you might not, and it's not anything to do with you. Again, psilocybin is a very, and all psychedelics are a very personal thing, and you're going to have your own experience with them. So go into them with an open mind if you are going to do them. Again, not telling you need to do this kind of stuff. So, in conclusion, these are very new and newly studied things. We don't know as much about them, and research is being done on them every day. If you want to do this kind of stuff, I highly suggest you're careful and you find the right source, you do some research and be around other people when you're going to do this kind of stuff. But at the same time, there is a lot of studies going on. So you may find in the future that this is going to become more common practice to be used in the treatment of some of these mental illnesses that are plaguing current society. But thank you for listening. I'll be coming back with new videos in the future and hopefully on some interesting topics. Please let me know what you thought of the video and if there's anything you'd like to see improved or anything you'd like to be covered. And as always,